What's the most unsettling thing someone said? The most unsettling thing someone said to me was, "You'll never be the same again." It was after a serious injury, and at the time, I didn't fully understand the weight of those words. It wasn't just about physical recovery. It was about how my identity, my routines, and even the way I viewed the world would shift. Even though I've grown from it, that sentence has stayed with me, reminding me that change, especially the kind we don't choose, is inevitable. Was on FaceTime with my wife because I was on the road. I was sitting alone in my hotel room, and she said, "Who's that behind you?" And then the screen went out, the lights went off, and then quickly came back on. I couldn't sleep after that, so just got back on the road and as far away from there as I could. A friend of mine got wasted one night at a bar I used to own. Before he left, he gave me a hug and said he wanted to say goodbye to me for being a good friend. He then tells me that he was leaving town next day because he was working with a government agency and was going to kill somebody in the morning that was stopping the progress of the town we live in. I laughed and took it as a drunk joke. He left with a bunch of friends. Next morning, another friend called me to say that our friend jumped off a boat and died. I was driving home per usual and got this random, unwavering feeling that my house had been broken into. I kind of laughed and said, "Please don't let my house have actually been broken into," out loud as I turned the corner onto my street. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up to the house were the blinds on my bedroom window. They were yanked around and twisted up. Some guy that lives across the street turned out to have been stalking me and decided to climb through my bedroom window. He took nothing valuable, just some weird personal items. It was terrifying to walk in and see my things rummaged through. It was even scarier when I talked to the neighbor and they admitted that multiple people in the neighborhood had seen it happen, but they were all too scared of OL to say anything. The weirdest part of it all, and I mean this guy took some creepy personal things, is that nagging feeling I had before I found the remnants of the break-in. I swear I knew before I knew, and that was such an eerie feeling. Someone I knew had just passed the bar exam to become a lawyer. He got home from the exam and checked his voicemails. There was only one. It started with the sound of distant howling wind. Then the sound of screaming men and women started, followed by what sounded like the cracking of whips. Continued for about 30 seconds and ended. He kind of chucked and said that Satan had called to congratulate him on passing the bar. Someone once told me, completely straight-faced, "I wonder how many people would miss you if you were gone. Maybe just your family. And even they would move on eventually." They said it in this cold, almost analytical way, like they were just observing a fact. It shook me to my core, not just because of what they said, but because they said it so casually, like my existence was just optional. It stuck with me in a way that I can't really shake, even now. After swim class at a YMCA, I was 10 years old in a locker room with only one other person in there, a middle-aged man. He was tying his shoes as I went into a stall to change. As I got out of the stall, he said, "Hey kid, do you hear that?" Obviously, my stranger danger senses kicked in, but I did try to remain quiet, and then I actually did hear what he was talking about. It was like someone's heavy breathing and then footsteps on walls, the concrete walls, like wet footsteps traveling up the back wall. I don't believe in ghosts or anything, so there probably was an explanation, but it was still freaky, and I was young. I looked at him, and he was staring up the wall following the footsteps. I remember how terrified and concerned his face was. I don't know why, but he suddenly hurried me out of the locker room, and he ran over to his friends to tell them what we had heard, and I ran to my grandpa. I saw him a couple more times throughout the year. Every time I drive by the now closed YMCA, I think about that. Unsettling in a different sense than most, but unsettling nonetheless. I was at work one night in the hospital. Pretty unremarkable night. Woke up in the ER, confused AF. My first words to a co-worker I know works the R, who was standing there, "What are you doing up here?" She lets out a howling cackle and says, "I'm not up there. You're down here. You had a seizure. Now you won't be able to drive for a whole year," and is literally bent over snorting laughing. I had no seizure history. In that moment, it felt like my entire life was a snow globe that got shook up and smashed on the ground. I still think about it sometimes. A reminder that your words and your effect in general matter. This elderly woman with dementia looked me in the eyes very seriously and told me I'd kill myself before the year was over. I thought that was an awful thing to say, but pushed it to the back of my mind and forgot. Several months go by, and I was going through depression, and one night got drunk and tried to kill myself. I recently remembered what the old lady said. So that was unsettling. P.S. This was years ago. I'm in a better mental state now. One time, someone looked at me completely serious and said, "You know, if you disappeared, I don't think anyone would notice for a while." It wasn't meant as a joke, or even to be mean, but it hit me so hard. Just the casual way they said it, as if it was a fact, messed with me for days. It wasn't even about the words. It was the realization that someone saw me as that invisible. It wouldn't be unsettling to me now because I've gotten used to it, but at the time it was unsettling because I never experienced it before. Probably the first time a schizophrenic client disclosed their delusions/hallucinations to me. The reason why I found it unsettling was because she casually dropped it into conversation as if it was completely real, and I was privy to that knowledge too. I was completely floored because one minute we were making small talk, and the next she was saying something completely terrifying. It just goes to show how real it is for them. It's heartbreaking. My daughter, at about 4 years old, sat bolt upright in bed as I was passing her room one night and said, "Dark forces are coming, Mummy," in a completely conversational tone. She then went right back to sleep, leaving me and her father slightly antsy for the next few days. About a month later, I realized it was from a trailer for Ben 10. However, at the age of 19, she does still maintain that there are shadow people in our house who watch us, which is nice. Edit, a random W that crept in there. When my husband told me, first thing he said on my birthday in this ugly, rushed voice, that my birthday present was the Comcast visit they'd apparently charged for, after asking me prior what I'd like for my birthday. Okay, fine, whatever, gray rock, but it hurt. That day I finally realized he's actually intending to be cruel, and it actually made my blood run cold. I was chatting with a lady I just met while waiting in a lounge. We got into the topic of having kids. She is too, and I said my husband and I are still enjoying each other's company since we just got married. We don't want it yet. And she said, "I know someone whose husband said he didn't want kids, and he ended up having an affair and having kids with a mistress." I have no idea what her intention was. I still get confused when I remember it. Honestly, this kind of sounds like the kind of stupid thing I'd blurt out because it's tangentially related to the conversation, then later realize it's weird and relive in my brain for the next year loudly crying face. I work at a nursing home and used to do the night shift. One night around 2 a.m., one of our ladies rang her call bell, and when I went to check on her, she said, "Can you get a sweater for that little boy in the corner? He looks cold." There was, in fact, no little boy in the corner, but I brought a coworker with me the next time I did rounds just in case, LOL. A few years ago, when my wife was super pregnant and on the brink of going into labor, we were both exhausted from many nights of Braxton Hicks contractions. We hadn't been sleeping well for days, constantly on edge about whether it was time to head to the hospital. Finally, one night, we managed to drift off, until I had this bizarre, half-awake dream where I knew there was a snake on the ceiling above us. Without a second thought, I jolted up, shook my wife awake, and said with absolute certainty, "There's a snake on the ceiling." Now, any sane person would question that, but in our exhausted, delirious state, she immediately jumped up too. We both flipped on the lights and in a panic looked up at the ceiling like it was completely normal to have a snake just chilling up there. After a few seconds of silence, it hit us both how absurd the situation was, and we just burst out laughing. The lights went off, and we fell back asleep. To this day, it's one of our favorite pregnancy stories, and I still occasionally remind her that there's a snake on the ceiling. Went on a night out, saw an old friend acting very erratically, assumed it was just too much alcohol. Asked him if everything was okay. He turned and looked me dead in the eye and said no and walked off. Didn't see him for the remainder of the evening. See on social media the next day that he's dead. My mom told me, when I was 12 to 13, that she was so glad she didn't have to worry or spend so much time over me like she had to do with two of my brothers. Brothers had mental and behavioral issues, undiagnosed, but I was the people-pleasing oldest. It made me feel so ignored and insignificant. In hindsight, I know what she meant, but as a child it was very hurtful. The worst thing ever said to me was said by my employer. I had just laid my mother in the grave on Sunday after a 6-month battle with cancer. And on that next morning he said, "You need to get over that mother SHT and get your mind back on the job." I never forgave him for that and quit after being a key employee for over 25 years. The boy down the street wanted to take me for wheeling in whatever town his mom lived in. He told me not to tell anyone where we were going. I didn't. And once we were in some woods, he asked again, "Did you tell anywhere where you are?" At that moment, I realized that I'm a dumbass. He didn't murder me or hurt me. It was just a creepy joke to him, but was a real eye-opener for me. I'm an unsolved mystery gal. I should have known better than to do that. My safety guards were down because I was with a friend. Friends do bad things to friends all the time. Not something that was said to me, but something I said to my mother when I was 3 years old. Apparently, I was playing with my toys while my mom was sitting, just watching me when I just suddenly stopped and turned to her, "Mummy, when I was in your tummy, I had a brother, but he had to go." And then I just continued playing. I'm an only child, and my mom never had an indication that she was pregnant with twins. Freaked the hell out of her, and still does. I have a daughter with an extremely complicated illness. Almost lost her to it twice when she was almost 3 and again 6 months later. In between, this was 15 years ago, I broke down and wept, being so worried about her and also how distant my wife had become from me as well. After I settled down, my wife told me that me crying like that had made me less attractive. My daughter is very stable now, and I've been divorced for several years. Maybe it's the most unsettling due to recency bias, but my grandmother died 2 months ago. I saw her best friend at church last weekend, and we were making small talk, and then she said, "I miss her." My phone never rings anymore. This lady is 94. She would talk to my grandmother on the phone every single day. They have been friends since the 40s. 80 years of friendship is gone, and she is the only one left of her peer group. Anyone who knew her when she was young is gone. And while she has children and grandchildren who call on occasion, it's not the same. It struck me as so incredibly sad and lonely. Every time I think about it, I tear up. I wanted to give her my number, but honestly, I don't know her well. She knows my face but can never remember my name. And I work full-time while I raise 3 kids, so I don't have much spare time. I'm heartbroken for her. We were planning a huge family vacation with like 19 family members, including my mother. We had already booked the property and were in a group chat talking about the trip. Out of the blue, my mother announces to the group that she is not going on vacation with us because she has a bad feeling but couldn't say what. The entire vacation ended up falling apart before it was time to go. The thing that makes this unsettling and something I'll never forget is that on the night before we were originally scheduled for vacation, my mom fell and ruptured her spleen into smithereens. This led to 3 surgeries, several weeks on life support, and more than 70 days in the hospital. She's always had a sixth sense about these things, but it never fails to amaze me when she's right. This was one I wish she had been wrong about. She's still recovering from the ordeal and just got out of the hospital last week. My friend lost 2 siblings to suicide/overdose, and then his father to cirrhosis within 18 months. It fucked him up, and he got worse into drugs, 11 years clean now. But when he was at his worst, he told me about this reoccurring dream about a train with all his deceased family members on it. He had it every night. Then he told me he was on the train one night, as a passenger, not just observing. Then he went to rehab. But I feel like if that dream didn't spur him to get help, he would have ridden it to the other side. A close friend who never hugged or told anyone that she liked/appreciated them. Basically anything remotely sappy, when leaving after hanging out gave me a huge hug and said she loved me. She died that night. Police and all that were involved because her flat looked like a bloody crime scene. Turns out it was natural causes. She'd had a random medical emergency. My dad told me he loved me, but he was extremely disappointed in me when I found out I was pregnant with my first kid at 18 to 10 years ago. I ended up marrying my boyfriend at the time, and now I'm a stay-at-home mom. We have 2 more kids, dogs, and a house. I think I ended up all right, but it still stings a little to think about it. Not sure why. Not to me necessarily. Mom was out of town, and I would go and check on her place. Was listening to her answering machine messages. There was a message from a local pastor thanking her for visiting his church. Not weird. However, shortly after the message, someone came into the office and killed him and injured his secretary. That was likely the last message he left. I'd already heard about it on the news. My brother woke up from sleep, climbed down the stairs. He stood at the top of the flight and beckoned my aunt to come with him. He then took her to his room and pointed out of the window, saying, "Look, there is a shoe hanging from the tree." Spoiler alert, there wasn't anything there. LOL. He is a crazy sleepwalker. We have tons of stories of him being absolutely unhinged hilarious in his sleepwalking episodes. My husband described the same sleep demon I was seeing. Neither of us have any history of sleep paralysis or hallucinating demons, but we had a really scary closet in one apartment. I slept facing it, and I kept imagining this hunched figure with long, stringy hair and beady white eyes looking at us in the bed. It wasn't like a vivid hallucination, I just thought I had a creepy imagination. Then my husband mentioned he kept picturing a figure by the bed. I never mentioned what I was seeing, so I asked what it looked like, and he described it perfectly. We were both pretty freaked out. It continued for a while. He would get drunk and yell at it. We named it, and I think that made it worse. But eventually we moved, and all was good. We did find a lot of mold when moving, though, so who knows? Maybe it was a hallucination that we shared. To be honest, I think for me it would involve something that left me feeling misunderstood or insecure. The person said they felt disappointed, or like I had let them down, even though I tried to help. This is perhaps the hardest thing to know, that my efforts were not enough, and the person left feeling dissatisfied. Don't worry, I won't find you. I won't be trying to find you. A BPD patient professing their love For me, the day of my discharge from my depression treatment program. What they said about me was clear evidence of limerence. Most of it was sheer projection and idealization. We did end up running into each other months later, and they wanted to talk to me and got in my way while I was trying to just leave. When they physically blocked my path, I simply got loud and yelled. I said no, which still didn't convince them to leave me alone. All the resulting attention on our interaction luckily did. I will never forget how my first thought upon hearing these words was, yeah, definitely not a thing a stalker would ever say /s. WTF made you say this? WTF is that line of thinking. My former boss is a lawyer, and one day a woman called and said that the neighbor of the woman claims that she took pictures of a naked girl and she needs a lawyer now. I wrote it down and told her my boss would call her back. I gave him the note. I wrote something like, Miss X's neighbor claims that she took photos of a naked young girl. And after he read it, he looked at me and said, can I see the pictures? And I just stared at him until he told me that was a joke. I really hope it was just a very, very tasteless joke, especially because he specialized in family law and works a lot with children. I once had a man sitting in my chair, I was a hairstylist for a time, tell me that once he got out of rehab, he was going to come find me. His face was set in a very odd way, and I was horrified. Unbeknownst to him, I had actually been planning on giving my 2-week notice a couple of days later. That was a stroke of luck, honestly. When I was about 19, I went to a bar, and my parents came with me. It's legal here, and my parents are chill. A dude came up and talked to me. It seemed normal at first, but turned creepy really fast. He asked a few questions, and already knew a bit like my name. He said he noticed me before, and a friend who knew me told him a bit. But then when I told him about how many siblings I have and stuff like that, he just said, I know, it started to creep me out how much he knew about me, who would just tell him all that. So I asked, who are you talking to again? He said, doesn't matter. I asked my friends, no one talked to him. I was at a bar in Austin, Texas by myself, and a motorcycle gang showed up. One of the guys came up to me at the bar and said, have you been fucking with my brother? I had just moved to town and didn't know but a few people in the city, so I told him, I have no idea who your brother is and I'm not fucking with anyone. He then proceeded to tell me he would kill me and put my dead body in a septic tank. I got out of there real quick. I said this to my parents after a ceremony for my ancestors. Grandma isn't happy and she's going to be doing bad things. I had a fever and was delirious. I actually woke up from my sleep and ran across the street in my PJs and bare feet to find my mom and tell her. She called the shaman the next day, faced with tears of joy. Are you okay? I heard a scream. A text I received after midnight from my ex that I had been broken up with for 4 years. He went down a pretty dark path, became homeless, and decided to live in a storage unit across the street where I lived to keep eyes on me to ensure my safety. Had no idea he had been living there until that night, and he had been shacking up there for a whole month. I immediately bought outdoor cameras the following day. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.